Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the Mighty Gluestick channel. I make videos about Dungeons & Dragons lore full-time and have a collection of over 600 videos on monster ecology, fantasy world history, character classes and magic items on my channel. If you like what I do, please consider becoming a member of the channel by clicking the join button down below or backing me on Patreon where you can get access to all of these scripts I write for these videos. Members of either also become members of the Secretive Gluminati on the Discord server for the channel, and of course subscribing to me here as I upload at least twice a week and have a live stream every weekend. The time has come, my friends, to remaster the Dragon series, and you gave me a very clear direction on how to go about doing that. So today we're going to talk about the Draconic Pantheon. My channel has always been devoted mainly to the most current edition and world setting for D&D, so I'll talk about the Dragon Pantheon and origin story mainly from a Forgotten Realms and 5th edition perspective, but one could not cover the broader subject of dragon gods and the truly pan-dimensional multiversal nature of dragons without going over the many other world settings and variations, because trying to stick to just one thing is what leads to some people getting very confused. A great example being the nature of Bahamut and Tiamat and the wildly conflicting origin stories and incarnations these gods take in various world settings and game editions. But to begin, as they say at the beginning, sit back, grab yourself a beverage, we're about to get deeply nerdy. Dragon gods are not at all like the other gods, nor are they exactly like the dizzying array of other primordial powers that arose before they were dreamed up by mortal beings. The dragon gods are also contradictory and don't fit very well with other mythologies, so some of the things I'm about to tell you will seem very biased in favour of dragons. But of course it is. This is the mythology of the dragons, one of the most arrogant and narcissistic species in the multiverse. In many sources, it warns very clearly that dragons do not tolerate views that contradict theirs when it comes to the origin nature of the multiverse and their supreme place in it, and it would soon become very clear to you why that is. Aside from their aggressive and self-centered, massive egos, I must also stress that this is reality from the dragon's point of view. It's not reality as it is, it's their mythology. Also, too often I see debates about what gods did this or that. It very much depends on who you're talking to and can vary wildly. So if something I say in this video seems wildly contradictory to, say, what you thought reality in D&D was if you base that view on my video on the Dawn War or the religion of the dwarves, you must not confuse these racial belief systems with factual events or confuse the lore of one edition with another if you can manage it. Though I'm the first to admit that this is a monumental task. Just watch my video on the Darrow to see a perfect example of how their mythology conceals their true origins. Also, more often than not, a fan of D&D lore will be highly focused on one or two specific things because they hold them dear to their hearts, have many fond memories of them, and have studied that lore in great detail, which I most thoroughly appreciate, as these people are gold mines of details and errata that's very hard to find on your own. But also, the flip side to that is they're almost zealotly protective of their lore, as if something could ever damage or detract from it, and they may ignore a great deal of other information that falls outside of their narrow, more focused interests. So, while I do appreciate their knowledge, it's hard to appreciate their attitude sometimes. Give others a chance to learn, allow them their errors, and provide assistance, not scorn and smugness. A sage only has merit in their service to others using the knowledge that they've attained. With that being said, let's get into the lore. In the beginning, there was the first void, and within that was Io. Io, who is Asgorath, who is the ninefold dragon, and there was the shadow void. Within that was Io's mirror self, Chronepsis, who is also Phallus, who is also Null. Io and Chronepsis came together from either end of the cycle of time, and where they finally and first met was the beginning and the end. This is why Io is represented by a perfect circle, because Io is all, Io is eternal. Chronepsis brought the multiverse to Io empty and cold, and Io breathed life and potential back into it all. As Io formed the circle of eternity, he became aware of all future events, instantly knew every spell that would ever exist, and is the true source of all the most epic and powerful magic in the multiverse. Many dragons believe that the Lady of Pain was created by Io from the egg of Adabu, the mysterious race of beings native to the city of Sigil. in the centre of the concordant neutral central plane of the multiverse, a plane also known as the Outlands, which many believe Io regards to be his home. A dragon sage has this to say: Io, swallower of shades, shine in the face of your servant, for he worships you in the morning, he propitiates you in the evening. I breathe the air, the north wind which comes from you. Be content, Lord of the gods, for you are exalted in the firmament, and your rays over my breasts are like the day. Io, the ninefold dragon, the concordant dragon, the great wheel eternal, moves his majestic form silently through the planes and crystal spheres, through the ether and the detritus of the worlds. He is content. Io is the creator of all dragonkind, father of the sleeping deep dragons, whose spirits lie at the very core of many worlds still. The god whose blood, thoughts, and life force established ground for creation and sustain it all. Dragons believe that the structure of space and time itself is not just held together by these two aspects of Io, but within newly refreshed shadow plane, Io released his blood, which became the phlogiston sea, thus created the prime material plane. And there certainly is a case to be made for it, as the aspect of Io named Askarath, which is the manifestation of his presence on the world of Toril, has not only manifested as a physical avatar only once, during the creation of the multiverse, but Askarath was so huge that even his scales, which were blue edged with silver and dark purple, were larger than any dragon that has ever existed, which, given the size of the stellar dragons that can reach 568 miles or 914 kilometers long, probably much, much larger. And it gives you some idea that Askarath simply manifesting an avatar and physically landing on a planet would be an extinction level event for every living creature on it. He had the size category of a medium to large planetary body. Those beings who report having communicated with Io typically tell of a dream-like experience where they were drawn out of their body in astral form and flew through the astral plane beside the incredibly vast spirit of Io. However, there are also many myths of him manifesting into any existing type of draconic form that he wished, even down to as tiny as a fairy dragon. But why would he bother manifesting in such a way? In a very real sense, he is truly omnipresent. The multiverse is his body, therefore he is aware of what goes on every part of it, and is present in every part of it, all of the time, forever. It gives some further insight into dragons that, as direct creations of Askarath, they are perfect, and everything in the universe is basically their god and their property. The hoard of a dragon is not just wealth to it, the very material is sacred to the dragon. But I'm on a bit of a tangent here, let's get back to the Serpent Pantheon. Monster Mythology, written by Carl Sargent and published by TSR in 1992, has this to say about the serpent gods of the reptilian and draconic races, and I'm quoting pages 97 and 98 here directly. The gods of the reptilian and amphibious creatures of the worlds include a powerful central group who, in myth, stand outside the rest of creation. These deities are seen as ancient to the point of timeless, primeval powers. They are not associated with other gods of other races. They do not create worlds or modify them much. They simply have their being unto themselves. This tends to make them more aloof from their cold-blooded worshippers than most gods, and they are usually slow to react to changes, even across decades and centuries. One consequence of this is that their races are often in a process of slow but remorseless decline, the Koatoa being an excellent example. These deities are usually regarded as being very wise, especially in their knowledge of very ancient and buried magic. They are often intensely magical in nature themselves, but they conceal these secrets and remain silent. Their group contains primarily 4 deities, who form 2 pairs: Mershulk, god of the Oanti, and Blibdulpulp, the Koatoan goddess, are both gods of declining races, who are themselves fairly inactive and somewhat uncaring. Mershulk is detached to the point of deep hibernation, rarely even bothering to wake itself with the affairs of the prime material, whereas the Koatoan goddess envelops herself within her secluded realm, hating everything outside it. The other pair is intriguing because the 2 deities are multi-aspect gods. Io, the ninefold dragon, contains within himself all alignments and is seen by dragons as the great creator of all things, including themselves. Dragons are very touchy about this. Just as mortal dragons consider that they have invented and devised just about anything and everything of any value or significance, so they hold Io to have created all of the multiverse and to have had the grace to permit less important beings, other greater gods, to play with and modify his creation subsequently. Dragons should not be argued with on this point. Shekinester, the Naga Queen, is a triple aspect goddess with aspects of lawful good, chaotic evil, and pure neutrality. She appears in the form of a maiden, a crone, and a mature female, coiled within the halls of the Court of Light. The Naga goddess is the embodiment of practical wisdom, a great wise serpent, as is Io himself. Jazerian, the Coatl god, also has an affinity with the central group, although Coatl think of him in a very subtle terms as a perfect archetype, which exists in other less perfect world serpent forms. This is a variation on the same theme which Io and Shekinester represent, that of a multiplicity of being. Thus, these very ancient reptile gods have a complexity which parallels their great age and wisdom. The other deity sometimes bracketed with them is singular, Chronepsis, the Death Dragon, presider over time, fate, and eternal law. Chronepsis never speaks or communicates, and if he knows the end of all things, he isn't going to be telling anytime soon. This mute god is seen as, in some draconic myths, as a re-unfolding of the reality which mirrors Io's perfectly balanced extension of being into these worlds. Just as Io became all things, Chronepsis draws everything back into himself. Sometimes, fittingly, these two are seen as brothers and represented together in a very complex symbol, which has at its centre the image of the nine-headed dragon with a ninefold forked tail, each head swallowing a tail. Both Io and Shekinester have servitor deities, errant children of the opposite sex, who are playful, wayward, and sometimes willing to allow mortals a peek into the secrets their powerful parents guard carefully. Io's daughter, Asterinian, is chaotic, flighty, playful, and laughing, and has nothing of the gravity of her mighty father. She serves Io as a messenger, but not a very reliable one in other things. She is readily distracted from any tasks he gives her. In myth, she has no mother and is born directly from Io's being in a highly complex manner involving many ruminations and symbolic ponderings by the ninefold father. This mythology is confusing and exists only in partial forms among dragons, who don't talk much about it anyway, and is also inconsistent from world to world. Shekinester's son Parafair is likewise a being with a light spirit. He is a trickster also, but he is more thoughtful and wise than the young dragon goddess. Parafair is a protector of secrets and concealed wisdom, a guardian, as his mother is, but these secrets are not of his own being, as his mother's are. Still, he is clearly closer in nature to his parent than Asterinian, who also has a same-sex parent, usually Jazerian in Naga mythology. Despite the Coatl's hermaphroditic nature, which is not represented in Naga mythology, Nagas seeing Jazerian in his male aspect. Both Asterinian and Parafair are chaotic neutral in nature. However, and despite their lightness and levity, meetings with them can be dangerous. Indeed, of all these powerful reptile gods, none is good aligned. The old gods, Blibdulpoop and Milshulk, are evil, while the others are poly-aligned. None of them regards the virtues of good as worthy of primary respect, nor as goals in themselves. They are either despised or part of a greater balance of nature. The avatars of these gods have certain features in common which make them distinctive. They all have high magic resistance, especially the avatars of the dragon and Naga gods, reflective of their intensely magical nature of these creatures and of the creations of these gods. They also have exceptional wisdom scores befitting very ancient deities and related properties such as immunity to illusions, which affect reptilian minds very differently in any event. These qualities are represented irrespective of strength of the god which manifests an avatar. Even a demigod avatar from this group will have relatively high resistance to magic and high wisdom. Besides Asterinian, Io has spawned a series of dragon gods across the worlds. Many local pantheons have such demigods or elemental forces in which white or red dragon gods are common, or of magic where gold and silver dragons gods are common, or trickery, which is rare since Asterinian often has this role, but chaotic good demigods are present in some pantheons, and more. None of these demigods have priests or shamans, and none of the draconic deities do. Io has empowered his creations with such physical strength and magical nature that he does not see any place for priesthoods, and many dragons can use priest and clerical spells anyway. So let me just draw your attention to that part. Dragons feel no need to become the equivalent of a cleric or paladin of any draconic god. Dragonborn certainly do, as do some kobolds and such, but true dragons do not. The countless minor draconic demigods are of no great concern. The mythology and lore for them would fill 1,000 libraries. No, what we're looking into is the archetypical dragon gods, and the 3 other children of the ninefold dragon, all born of his own being, are important enough to be considered. Bahamut, the glorious and resplendent platinum dragon, is lord of gold and silver dragons and a powerful upholder of the values of lawful good. He has something of his parents' detachment and is not eager to involve himself directly in the affairs of the prime material plane, but unlike Io, he is watchful and encourages worshippers. Bahamut even has a handful of human and demi-human worshippers in some worlds. Certainly, on the planet Toril, this is the case, and in human myth, he often keeps a special watch over paladins of exceptional nobility. Tiamat, his lawful evil sister, is a different creature altogether. She is the embodiment of the most organised and powerful evil within Io, mirroring Bahamut, who is a near-perfect actualisation of Io's best goodness. Tiamat has taken up residence in the Hells and enjoys life there insomuch as this victorious brute can be said to enjoy anything. She struts about, proclaiming herself as the creator of all evil dragons. She's often seen as having dwelt for a long time in the prime material, and her time there is marked by her role as the despoiler, but also as a creature powerful in magic, and even with a fertility aspect due to her fecund nature. After this time she withdrew to the Hells, and many races have a myth which tells of her banishment. Different myths, though, have many different gods responsible for this banishment. Bahamut is assisted by a sun or a sky god in banishing Tiamat, but this is a different god from world to world for the most part. Phallus, the night dragon, is in some ways the most dangerous and sinister of Io's great broods. Gravely beautiful in his perfect black and deep blue scales, a handsome dragon of shadows and illusion, is a brilliant, gifted master of disguise who keeps his own counsels and has not the recklessness of Tiamat. Phallus has a complex magical metabolism, for his own beauty and perfection require a constant stream of death for their sustenance, while the shells of the creatures he slays become the undead creatures the dragon has for an entourage. Much more than any other dragon god, Phallus has become intimately involved in the affairs of other races, providing they have lives and souls to steal for his own sustenance. Phallus is an evolving evil, one developing more powers related to undeath, energy-draining, rotting disease and the like, one whose life force is entirely dependent on the death of others. So, if I may interject here, in that respect, Phallus is like the Slardy god Igor, in that his power is growing as entropy increases in the multiverse over time. Of course, Igor is doing it backwards. There are many stories told by sages of the interrelation of life forces and strength of gods and mortals, but nothing is as dreadful as Phallus' leeching of worlds and souls. Io gave birth to a truly terrifying beauty in the sleek and ever-smiling night dragon. If I may go on a little tangent here, those of you who watched my video on Vecna will know that a primal serpent demigod whom Vecna's mother served in life also became the source of much of the deep and forbidden magical knowledge that Vecna attained while he was a mortal being. I suspect strongly that this was an aspect of the serpent demigod Parafair. Parafair is a guardian of magical secrets and hidden places, usually far below the ground, and he serves more than any god in this way, both his own mother Shekinesta and very diverse assortment of other gods, including even such unlikely candidates as Damathoin of the dwarves. Parafair's role is not to prevent access to such secrets and magic entirely, though rather he tests the wisdom and resourcefulness of those who come seeking. He places non-lethal traps, decoys, diversions, mazes, cryptic clues, and the like to challenge the adventurous. He will himself present riddles and puzzles which demand an answer if he is to permit questers to pass him by. He is unconcerned with morality or ethics, simply caring for the mental resourcefulness and the skill. This is echoed throughout so many practices of magical learning that it is as if Parafair is the original architect of the relationship between mystical master and their adept student. Parafair does have one weakness, however, which is shared by a great many dragons and I imagine a great many wizards as well. and that is flattery, which focus on the smartness of his riddling, his puzzles and challenges, all expressed as admiration for his skills. A comment such as a heartfelt, "That was sneaky. We had a lot of trouble dealing with that," will gain some mileage with the wise but slightly vain Parafare. Attempts to deceive or trick him do not go down well unless there is a spectacularly well planned and executed to a degree that Parafare feels he's learned something new just by experiencing it. Let's take a closer look at Io's other children. I remind you here that Io is a multiversal power. Some of his children are gods of Greyhawk, some are gods of the Forgotten Realms, some are gods of Dragonlance. I focus mainly on Forgotten Realms, so I'll be looking at them and this history of dragons in realm space on the world of Toril. Originally on the world of Toril, the greater draconic gods were Azgarath, Null, and Task. The intermediate deities were Kareska, Nather Skythatch, and Zorquan. The lesser deities were Astalabor, Azharul, Bahamut, Garrix, Halal, Kalzarened, Lendis, Sardior, Tamara, and Tiamat, with a number of demigods such as Kuyutha. The pantheon looks much different now, and it has a very long involved history. The Dragon Pantheon has a realm of its own in the form of a single plane containing a massive mountain, which only very few of the gods having permanent layers there, but it's accessible to the rest of the draconic gods and with many different ways to get there. For example, Tiamat can get there from her home on the Hell of Avernus, and there are other portals open to the celestial realm of Vandor. If you have not heard of Dragon Eyrie, it's because the dragons don't share this information with non-dragons. So let's take a look at Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition sourcebook titled The Cult of the Dragon, written by a large group of authors with the lead design by Dale Donovan and published by TSR in 1998. I'll try to quote the lore on these dragon gods directly where I can, with paraphrasing, of course, as is my way. After which I'll talk about the Draco Holy Wars and the era called the Dragonfall War, which will bring us up to the modern era on Toril. This is a good point to pause and refresh your beverage, by the way. Azgarath, also known as the World Shaper, is a greater power of the Outer Planes. He is said to encompass all alignments in his being, but he is often regarded as neutral. His portfolio is creation and his symbol is an unadorned circle, representing totality. In the Outer Planes, he is more commonly known as Io, and the location of his domain is unknown. Perhaps he simply exists as Io and manifests when required as Azgarath on the world of Toril. Astalabor, known as Acquisitor and Horde Mistress, is a chaotic neutral intermediate power of Limbo. Her portfolio is acquisitiveness, specifically the desire to acquire and hold wealth, and in doing so gain status. Her symbol is a 12-faced gem. She is one of the archetypes of dragonkind. Her avatar manifests as a huge dragon that shimmers with all the chromatic and metallic colours of dragons. Her mythical lair may be located somewhere in the chaos of Limbo, and it would represent one of the greatest hoards of treasure you could imagine. Astalabor instills in dragonkind the innate need for collecting and protecting a hoard, but this is not greed. She actually dislikes greed. She just loves big piles of treasure. Garrix. I often get requests to talk about this formidable god, known as Fire Lord, All-Destroyer and Cleanser of Worlds. He is chaotic evil, an intermediate power of the Abyss. His portfolio is fire using dragons and destruction by flame, and his symbol is a reptilian eye superimposed over a red flame. He manifests as either a colossal red dragon or gold dragon, but in either form he breathes massive destructive dragon fire that is like the corona of the sun. The Draconomicon says that Garrix has a lair in the Abyss. That was published in 1990. The sourcebook Races of the Dragon, published in 2006, tells us that he has been driven insane from lairing for too long on the plane of Pandemonium. He is, oddly enough, worshipped by some druids as a revered force of destruction and renewal, claiming that devastation is the necessary precursor of rejuvenation. On the world of Toril, he was central to the events that led to the start and eventual end, or ceasefire, in the genocidal war between the dragons and the giant empire of Astoria. This started about 27,500 years ago, so very ancient history, and though it was an extremely important era, it only lasted for 1,000 years. As wars between massive and powerful creatures goes, this is a very long time, granted, but it was a long time ago. That war started only 1,000 years after the great migration of the Green Elves from the Fey realm to the world of Toril. Interestingly, some rogue gold dragons still revere Garrix in his aspect as the cleanser of worlds, but Garrix is not interested in worshippers or relationships with other gods. He teaches by example, actually manifesting on the prime material plane worlds to wreak unholy swaths of destruction across the landscape. Red dragons do tend to flock to him when he shows up. Halal, known as the Jester or the Pursued, is a chaotic good lesser power of Arborea and Isgard. Her portfolio is draconic humour, inventiveness and pleasure, and her symbol is a single white flame, representing the light of wit. In the outer planes, she is more commonly known as Asterinian, and is often regarded as chaotic neutral in alignment. Her domain in Arborea is unknown, but in Isgard, her domain Brasberg is in Nidavellir. The Jester also has a male aspect known as Avachel, or Quicksilver, who features prominently in Elven legends. She is, according to myth, the first child of Asgarath and serves him as his messenger, which is a duty she never takes lightly, even though in most other things she's quite unreliable. She never fails Asgarath. Halal manifests in whatever form suits her purposes at any given moment. If she's not in the process of playing a trick on someone, she usually manifests as a fairy dragon that glows with a yellow-gold aura, or as a happy-looking copper dragon. As Asterinian, she always manifests as a huge brass dragon. Halal is revered by some brass and copper and fairy dragons who appreciate and identify with her sense of humour. These species don't worship Halal alone, however, unless they devote their entire lives to jokes. Halal encourages her followers to think for themselves, rather than relying on the word of others. The worst crime in her eyes is not trusting in oneself. She has little patience for tyrants, even well-intentioned ones, and even less patience for cruelty or bullying. She teaches that one must be freed of restraint, whether real or imaginary, in order to freely express one's opinions. If you watch a brass dragon closely, you will see them thank Halal when they learn something or create something new, as they believe this honours her. In Elven folklore, Halal is a close companion of Erevan Illiser, in her aspect as Asterinian. The two gods travel together and get up to some legendary adventures that young elves find inspiring. Kalzarinad, now deceased, was also known as the Keeper of Dark Wonders and was a neutral evil demi-power of the Grey Wastes, who was on good terms with the greater deity Null. His portfolio was dragon magic, specifically the uncaring, evil or selfish application of dragon magic. His symbol was a 5-pointed star encircled by a dragon grabbing its own tail in its mouth. Kalzarinad is said to have aided Samasta in creating the first Dracolich. In 1358 DR, the dragon goddess Kareska subsumed the entirety of his portfolio and worshippers. Kalzarinad's corpse appeared in the astral plane shortly after. Null may also have been gifted with the secrets of creating undead Dracoliches after Kalzarinad's passing. Kareska, known as the Wonderbringer or Light of Magic, is a chaotic neutral intermediate power of Limbo. Her portfolio is magic, specifically dragon magic, and magical creativity. Her symbol is a 5-pointed star with the lower 2 points extended. She is the dragon who first taught dragonkind how to wield magic, and is able to empower any draconic creature with whatever level of spellcasting abilities she wished it to have. A sure sign she was showing favour to a draconic creature is its sudden ability to cast spells or use spell-like abilities, so, understandably, she's revered by dragons of all kinds. She most often shows favour to draconic beings who are particularly devoted to researching new spells, have a talent for it, and who frequently invoke her name in the hopes that she will imbue them with her power. Her natural form is unknown, but when she manifests it can be as any kind of dragon. However, she is always surrounded by a pulsating aura of extremely potent magical power. Lendis, known as the Scale of Justice, the Balancer, the Weigher of Lives, and the World Shaper, is a lawful, neutral, intermediate power of the celestial plane of Nirvana. His portfolio is balance and justice, and his symbol is a sword balanced on a needle's point. He is the consort of Tamara, and in some traditions, they are the parents of Bahamut, with the three of them commonly worshipped together. Lendis is the judge of dragons in life instead of after death, and in his natural form he appears as a huge, wingless, platinum dragon with tarnished scales and eyes that gleam with a light which none may hide from. He is said to care only about judging others and never turns his gaze on himself. He is the personification of the principle that every action has a reaction and that everything has to be balanced at the end. It is Lendis who ensures that those who do evil acts are rewarded with evil, those who do good receive good, and those who live by the sword die by the sword. He has no mercy in his soul, no forgiveness, and gives no second chances. As an arbiter of dragonkind, Lendis serves as judge, jury, and executioner. When a dragon commits an injustice against all dragons, Lendis, or one of his Great Worm followers, goes to dispatch appropriate justice. Punishments are severe, and no one hears of anyone appealing to his mercy. Some of his dragon adepts follow the Patarian Code, which is recorded in the sourcebook titled Dragons of Faerun, published in 2006, but is also noted in the Draconomicon, published in 1990. It's a draconic code of honor created by the gold dragon Pataris in the ancient past, originally intended as a guide to conduct for the lords who attended the King of Justice, who will learn more about the King of Justice when I make a video talking specifically about gold dragons. The Patarian Code eventually was adopted by many gold and also silver dragons, and is very similar to the codes of chivalry adopted by legendary knight orders of humanity. It includes paying homage to Lendis, as well as the draconic deities Bahamut and Tamara. The code varies in its fine detail, but the main precepts are justice and good above all, honour and fealty to the king, honour and respect to righteous innocence, honour and duty to the balancer, Lendis, and her mercy, Tamara, and the justice maker, Bahamut, honour and protection to lesser races, honour and correction to the enemies of justice and good, honour and forbearance for oneself. Tamara, referenced to as her benevolence or beneficence, or her mercy, is a neutral good intermediate power of the celestial plane of Elysium. Her portfolio is life, light, mercy, and forgiveness, and her symbol is a 7-pointed star on a field of black. She is the consort of stern and implacable Lendis, and very important to gold and silver dragons in particular, along with her son Bahamut. By far the kindest and most benevolent of the draconic deities, though important to gold and silver, the brass and copper dragons actively worship her as their patron goddess, and theirs is a peaceful and merciful faith, not as hard-edged as the golds and silvers, who lean more into the strict lawfulness of Lendis and prosecution of it espoused by Bahamut. In her natural form, Tamara is a huge wingless platinum dragon with burnished scales, slightly smaller than Lendis. She radiates a comfortable aura of warmth and love, her eyes shining with the brightness of the sun itself. Dragons who are healers and staunch enemies of the undead tend to be devoted to Tamara. Her temples are essentially hospitals, and she fiercely detests anyone who would seek to artificially prolong their life, particularly those who seek to prolong the life of a dragon against its will, so she hates Dracoliches above all things. Bahamut, known as the King of all good dragons, Justice Maker, Lord of the North Wind, and also known by the name Zymor on the Forgotten Realms, is a lawful good lesser power of Mount Celestia. His portfolio is good dragons, metallic dragons, wisdom and enlightenment, and justice. Justice tempered with mercy and punishment with forgiveness. And his symbols are the polar star above a milky nebula, or a reptilian eye superimposed over a square of gold. His domain, Bahamut's palace, is located in Mercuria, in the 7 heavens of Celestia. In some traditions, he is said to be the son of Tamara and Lendis, and in others, he, Tiamat, and Null, or Phallus, are said to be children of Ascaroth, or Io. Bahamut is stern and very disapproving of evil, always arguing with Ascaroth about his crusade against it. He accepts no excuses for evil acts, and doesn't tolerate even minor offences by evil creatures. In spite of his stance, he's also considered to be one of the most compassionate beings in the multiverse. He has limitless empathy for the downtrodden, the dispossessed, and the helpless. Despite his lesser role in the Draconic Pantheon, he is an important god for the forces of celestial good. Bahamut spends most of his time in court, holding in his shining palace in the 7 heavens, in the plains of Celestia. It is worth noting that Bahamut is unable to turn his back on any good creatures that are in need, though he is free to help them in indirect ways, such as providing advice that borders on prophecy, showing the way to safe refuge or healing with his powerful magic. I have a whole video on Bahamut, which I'll be updating eventually as well. Tiamat, known as the Dragon Queen, the queen of all evil dragons, the chromatic dragon, nemesis of the gods, the dark lady, queen of chaos, the undying queen, bane of Bahamut, the avaricious, and the ruler of Avernus, that's a lot of titles, is a lawful evil lesser power of Bartor. Yet, it is shocking to learn that her and Bahamut are so low on the pecking order of draconic gods, right? Her portfolio includes evil dragons, chromatic dragons, evil reptiles, so I'm thinking Komodo dragons, greed, and the entire region of Chesenta and Unther on the continent of Faerun. Her symbol is a 5-headed dragon. Her domain, Tiamat's lair, is located in Avernus, in some traditions, she, Bahamut, also known as Zymor, and Null, or Phallus, are said to be children of Asgarath or Io. In the realms, she's known as T'Chaza in the nation of Chesenta, and was part of the Untitled Pantheon. Both Bahamut and Tiamat have an eternal rivalry with each other, and Toril is a planet on the prime material plane that seems to serve as one of their staging points or battlegrounds in this conflict. So they do appear to be more important gods from the perspective of that planet and its people than they really are in the grand view of the Draconic Pantheon in general. Tiamat is a highly complex deity to say the least, so instead, to say the most, I will turn directly to the words of Ed Greenwood, original creator of the Forgotten Realms setting. Tiamat's physical body, like those of the Chosen of Mystra, has been slowly failing over the much passing time, regenerating ever more slowly and afflicting her with internal aches and pains. Tapping into the power of the growing in part because of the disaffected members of the Cult of the Dragon who turn to her as the True One or the True Hope, worship and favour him, as she did in 1371 DR from the point of view of the inhabitants of Toril, renewed and strengthened Tiamat and allowed her to truly become the Dragon Queen as her clergy on Toril reverenced her stronger and stronger. Yet this very experience of ailing and aging made Tiamat, until then a creature of bold fury and recklessness, aggressive attacks, suddenly more paranoid. So she misinformed her clergy, who were in no position to see through her lie and know differently, as to her celestial whereabouts, and wealth and servitors and vast ruled dominion. She also became more scheming and patient, and determined to spread parts of herself into several places so as to survive the ravages of time and the eventual attacks of foes. Her great kingdoms on Heliopolis and later Dragon Eyrie were both largely fictitious. She changed locations from one time to the other because of intrepid wizards adventuring from the realms, ambitious members of the Twisted Rune seeking allies or sources of power they could plunder or compel, actually reached Heliopolis and discovered Tiamat had no realm there at all. What she did have in Heliopolis was a lone, spellbound, shriveled, literally half-mad Netherese arch-wizard magically confined in a cave, who was the listener of the five-headed. He heard words of prayers made to Tiamat and saw her offerings, and yielded up that information when Tiamat visited his twisted mind. If need be, Tiamat's sentience could move into the listener's mind and so be on Heliopolis, and even use the listener's lich body as her own, and survive if her five-headed form was ever destroyed. She apparently used the listener to at least twice to attack foes from behind when they had no idea that Tiamat was anything other than in front of them and alone. She could also manifest an aspect of herself through him, though she never did so in earnest rather than in mere brief experimentation. No one on Toril was aware of this. When the Twisted Rune explorers found the listener and tried to mind scour him for magical lore, they uncovered Tiamat's secret. Enraged, she entered into the listener, managed to mentally dominate the Twisted Rune mages, and compelled them to assist her in relocating her Dragon Eyrie by assisting her in mentally destroying and subsuming the draconic deity Azarul, whom she had long been spying upon and scheming as a rival that she could someday destroy. She took over his body and rulership, renaming his gigantic and labyrinthine cave lair as the Cave of Greed. To others in Dragon Eyrie and to priests and sages it remained the dragon-spawn pits of Azurul, and she merely assumed old Azurul, a fearsome, bad-tempered draconic deity of many long, sharp-projecting body barbs and a mighty mastery of magic. So he'd hit on a new name for his home, but they didn't realise that Tiamat had actually taken over his form completely. She then used Azurul, assisted by what was left of the listener and the controlled Twisted Rune wizards, very much as she had done the listener back on Heliopolis. The soft borders connecting Dragon Eyrie to Avernus allowed Tiamat to visit the Cave of Greed whenever she wanted to, but she apparently did so only once, to convince dragons, both living and spirits and some Abishai, to accompany her to Avernus and fight for her there. For all this time, the real Tiamat was in Avernus in the Nine Hells, rebuilding an ever larger kingdom in the most inhospitable mountains and rift-like alpine valleys of that layer that she'd long ago demoted from rulership of that largely lawless layer because she was so ineffective in preventing the various outcast devils there from repeatedly attempting coups that threatened the dominion of Asmodeus. Though the Supreme delved deep into her mind and saw no disloyalty, he didn't destroy or otherwise punish her, merely left her to her own devices, like a watchdog, reasoning that in building her own power, she would fight against the outcasts and any other intruders far more effectively than she would otherwise. And he also left her with the notion that she could earn her return to rule if she pleased him enough with her performance. Formerly, when she was given by Asmodeus the duty of guarding the largest and best known way between Avernus and Dis, the route by which dumb beasts, lesser and least devils and armies gated in from elsewhere would have to pass through, and she fulfilled this duty faithfully by stationing an aspect of herself there that never departed or neglected its duty. So she's all over the place. When the spell plague struck, it didn't just affect Toril and Abir, its ripples tore through the multiverse, wreaking havoc large and small. Dragon Eyrie was disintegrated, and although the plane of that great dragon mountain was linked to Avernus and other planes, in the tumult of destruction, a stunned but half-crushed Azuriel, physically torn open like a butchered bird, as described by one who saw his violent arrival in the Barrens, was hurled violently into Gehenna, Banehold, where an opportunistic god Bane pounced on the dazed and physically ruined draconic deity to enslave it and discovered Tiamat's presence inside it, and immediately sought to compel and rule her. Tiamat was furious, of course, but left her true self still in Avernus, and she was wise enough to see that the challenges she was facing at the time from various ambitious outcast devils, she could not hope to survive the battle on two fronts, and she would have to exert her full power to defeat Bane and Banehold. So she allowed Bane to enslave that part of her that was Azuriel, and even served him faithfully, learning his secrets and relaying them wholly and accurately to Asmodeus as she learned them, which pleased the Overlord of Hell very much. For his part, Bane exults in tyranny and rule, not slaughter and destruction, and so gloated in harassing and harnessing his new slave in any way that he could. And Tiamat suffered all of those indignities and bided her time, learning all she could of Bane's nature and powers, awaiting her chance. And when it came, the details aren't known, she struck ruthlessly, not only freeing herself from Bane's tyranny and snatching her Azuriel's body out of Banehold and into Avernus, she drained much of Bane's power to do so, passing all that she didn't need to mend Azuriel's body and fully link it with her own, so that in Avernus she has her true body and aspect guarding the way to Dis, and a battle body, or fighting body, in that of Azuriel, which she uses to meet with all others, keeping her true self safe and hidden. So an adventure encounter, such as can be happened in the Rise of Tiamat adventure, will be with this body, enabling Tiamat herself to survive unscathed any adventurer's attacks. Delighted by the gift of divine power torn from Bane, who survived lessening in might but not in essentials, Asmodeus offered her the rulership of Avernus once more, whereupon Tiamat surprised and touched him by saying she didn't want it, because she wouldn't be good at it, that Bel would do a better job, and that Asmodeus shouldn't spurn him and so make him a foe, and that Avernus needed to remain a largely wild safety valve for the Nine Hells to keep his rule strong, but that she would willingly and devotingly be his champion on Avernus, smiting all who worked against him whenever she became aware of their treason. So Asmodeus held a great ceremony in which he named Tiamat formally guardian to the gate of the second layer and his latest vassal. He also privately urged her to provide covert magical aid to imprison Zariel behind Bel's back, to make sure that Bel didn't siphon all of Zariel's power and become a problem. When she did so, she became Bel's compulsion, and through their hostile meeting of minds that saw Asmodeus had forewarned and prepared Bel to deal with her, so as to establish firm control over her, imprisoning her in the kingdom of Avernus so that she doesn't get above herself and kindle personal ambitions. Tiamat was enraged anew, though she hid her ire from both Bel and Asmodeus, and now believes that all the archdevils of the Nine Hells see her as a lesser being, a mere monster, to be duped and exploited. Determined to be caged nowhere and by no one, she reaches out to her mortal worshippers in the realms and conceives of a way to manipulate them into bringing her, or at least an aspect of her, fully into Toril. All of which has left her in the situation and location she's in at the beginning of the Horde of the Dragon Queen adventure for 5th edition. So saith Ed Greenwood. Task, known as the Taker and the Holder, and also the Rester, is a chaotic evil lesser power of pandemonium. His portfolio is greed and selfishness, and his symbol is a pile of 5 coins. His physical manifestation is a huge dragon whose hide is so studded with coins and gems from snout to tail that it's impossible to determine his actual colour of his scales. Followers of Astalabor have long argued over the relative size of the horde of both these dragon gods. Horde size is always a popular topic among dragons anyway. While Astalabor is the deity of acquisition, with no stigma of greed attached, Task is greed personified. He wants it all, and it doesn't matter to him what he has to do to get it or what it costs others to obtain what he wants. His worshippers share the same attitude, particularly red dragons, but a fair few Baras dragons are well known for their dark greed. Task reveres greed and selfishness, and sometimes rewards followers who show these traits in excess. One such gift he grants his followers is to turn them into undead horde dragons on their death, so that they continue to guard their treasures from opportunistic looters. While it's believed that Task's boons are never material, since Task can never give up anything he owns, truly faithful, meaning greedy, dragons are rewarded with material goods created by Task himself, powerful artifacts, though I suspect these items will always end up back in Task's horde eventually. Zorquan, known as the High One, the greatest worm, is a neutral intermediate power of the Outlands. His portfolio is dragonkind and dragonness, the essence of that which is dragons, and his symbol is a black circle superimposed on a larger concentric white circle. Myths say that Zorquan can take the form of a perfect specimen of whatever species of dragonkind he wants. His eyes crackle with sparks, sometimes spitting lightning bolts that flash and course around his body as his internal power overflows from within him. He is the ideal draconic pin-up model, and it was his divine personifications of the pride and status of all dragons that led him to actually drive all the dragons of the Forgotten Realms towards a state of apathy in their active worship of the draconic gods, particularly during the time of dragons between minus 30,000 to minus 24,000 Dale Reckoning, when the draconic realms of Argistiliax, Kae-Sin Malsver, Darast River Thicker, and Thark Rix Gontix. Zorquan is totally unconcerned with creatures of non-draconic species, unless their behaviour affects all dragonkind in some way. He is said to be an implacable enemy of any who would harm dragonkind as a race. However, he doesn't really care about individuals. As such, he never bothers to punish adventurers for killing the occasional chromatic dragon. Sardior, known as the Master of the Gem Dragons, the Ruby Dragon, and the Prince of all Neutral Dragons, is a neutral lesser deity with the symbol of a ruby that glows from within. He is the god of night, psionics, and secrets, as well as the gem dragons. His manifested form is that of a bright ruby-red, long and sinewy-bodied dragon. He almost looks like a stretched-out ancient red dragon, but up closer he is clearly something very different. His demeanour is conversational, witty, playful, and he enjoys lounging around his immense flying castle named the Ruby Palace, which is in a weird pseudo-pocket dimension, technically orbiting the world and sometimes seen as a sort of a moon from the surface of Toril down below, but spelljammers have observed it orbiting in perpetual shadow on the other side of the world from the sun, and again, looking more like a small red moon. His realm is also able to shift between planes, and on a number of occasions Sardior has moved his fortress, visiting the Genie Citadel of Ice and Steel within the plane of air, and Ouroboros, the realm of Jezerian. As a relatively young god, Sardior doesn't rank very high and has few worshippers or temples. He does keep his own celestial court, including 5 Thanes, one for each of the breed of gem dragon, except for the obsidian dragons, who he's banished from his court for some reason. He does have worshippers in the realms, according to Ed Greenwood, though there are not yet any printed products that talk about them. Last, and one of the greater draconic gods, we have Null, known as the Deathworm, guardian of the lost, night dragon, and the Reaver. He's worshipped as 2 aspects of a dragon deity in the Torilian crystal sphere. Here he is regarded as both a lawful evil lesser god, power of Karseri, and a lawful neutral intermediate power of the Outlands. His portfolio is death and the dead. His evil aspect is the Reaver, and his portfolio is taking life, decay, and the undead, energy draining, and necromancy. In his neutral aspect, he's known as the Guardian of the Lost, and is the Guardian of the Dead and the Shepherd of dragon spirits in the afterlife. His symbols are a circle divided diagonally into white and black semicircles for the Guardian of the Lost, or a draconic skull for the Reaver. In the outer planes, it is commonly known that Null is in fact 2 different deities, and in most areas known as Phallus, who is the Reaver aspect, and is regarded as neutral evil, and whose domain is the Mausoleum of Pain in Menethys, and also Chronepsis, who is that aspect called the Guardian of the Lost, who is regarded as a neutral god whose domain is the mausoleum of Chronepsis in the Outlands. As with most draconic deities of Faerun, Null's faith has been slowly dwindling for centuries, and as of the fall of the gods, he has but a handful of devoted adherents, some of whom were undead. Since the time of Troubles, Null has begun to make inroads among the sacred ones of the cult of the dragon. Null's motivation is in part due to a desire to staunch his gradual loss of power, and in part to counter Tiamat's recent attempts to incorporate the followers of the Scalyway into her own faith. Null is said to speak with the dusty croak of the undead. He is arrogant, fatalistic, proud, and totally lacking in any sense of humour. The Night Dragon does not anger easily, but instead slowly nurtures grudges that eventually blossom into undying hatreds for slights and attacks, imagined or otherwise. Null's residences, both mausoleums, are said to coexist in part on the negative material plane and the demi-plane of shadows, or the Shadowfell. In fact, the two death houses may in reality be one structure that exists both in the Outlands and within the plane of Carceri. Null has a long-standing hatred of both Tiamat and Bahamut, who in some mythologies are said to be his siblings. While Null and Tiamat were once allied, some rift in the prehistory of the realms has driven them into everlasting enmity. Null nurtures a deep grudge against Halal as a result of an elaborate practical joke that robbed the Deathworm of his dignity centuries ago. While the Death Dragon has little patience for most of the other surviving draconic gods, he bitterly resents Tamara's attempts to interfere with the inevitability of death and darkness and hates her with a special passion. Now, let us turn our attention to the events called the Draco Holy Wars and the Dragonfall War. The Draco Holy Wars were a series of civil wars among dragonkind during the time of dragons, over philosophical differences between the different religious dogmas of the Draconic Pantheon. The dragons of the time were devout followers of their gods, and as such, devotion sparked intense wars among them. These wars were fought not only between different species, but also within these species as well. The most violent wars started because of the debate over Asgarath's alignment and nature. Every species of dragon believed Astragarth represented the pinnacle of their particular race, while silver dragons could grudgingly accept the gold dragon's insistence that Asgarath was a lawful good gold dragon. Neither could tolerate the red dragon's claim that Asgarath was a chaotic evil red dragon. At one time, the resulting wars threatened the entire race with extinction. An example of a civil war within the species was one related to the growing faith of Bahamut, which divided the usually monolithic gold dragon culture. As the precepts of Bahamut became more popular, the younger golds began to forsake the worship of Lendis and Tamara, the traditional gods of their race, as they regarded them as old-fashioned and inconsistent, to embrace the faith of the Platinum Dragon, an attitude that put them at odds with the older gold dragons, who worshipped those two dragon gods with fanatical devotion. Although this conflict never degenerated into outright violence, religious intolerance became quite widespread among old gold dragons, something that had no precedence until that time and had never happened since. Perhaps the most well-known of these conflicts to modern scholars is the Dragonfall War, fought between the followers of Bahamut and Tiamat. It began around minus 30,000 DR, when followers of Bahamut slew Nagamat, the worm general of Tiamat. During the ensuing battles, Tiamat unleashed all sorts of dragon-like beings, aberrant creatures that became known as the spawn of Tiamat. To counter them, Bahamut created his own agents, the original Dragonborn, to act as his knights and soldiers. Over time, draconic philosophers came to the conclusion that all of the fighting was wasteful and that the gods who allowed such behaviour were not worthy of their worship. Some believe this behaviour was influenced by the god Zaukun, as a way to stop the dragon wars. Others believe some dragons feared that if they continued battling each other in such conflicts, they would eventually face extinction. And of course, don't forget that during this time they faced the pressure of the giants as well. Those dragons that were worried about their survival came up with a solution. Instead of battling each other, dominance among them would be established by status, and to determine this, they developed this highly complex Zorvental game. Eventually, most dragons turned away from the war and from religion in general. This started the dragons' apathy towards their gods, which lasted for 1,000 years, and it was speculated that several members of the original Draconic Pantheon just died and vanished from the multiverse due to lack of worship. Only the followers of Bahamut and Tiamat didn't lose their faith towards their god and continued fighting the Dragonfall War. It was prophesied among the few remaining worshippers of the draconic gods that a turning of the great cycle would foretell the return of religious fervour among dragonkind. This turning happened in 1373 DR, after the last Rage of Dragons decimated most of the Draconic population in Faerun, and this realization sparked the need of dragons to look to the help of their gods once more. The dragon gods, who survived the long years without worshippers, received a great influx of power from the new Draconic followers. However, this also threatened Faerun with the possibility of a new battle in the Dragonfall War. The Dragonfall War was a conflict between Draconic followers of Bahamut and Tiamat, part of the larger civil wars known as the Draco Holy Wars. In some respect, the conflict never ended. It began in the time of dragons, minus 30,000 DR, when followers of Zymor slew Nagamat, and it's continued ever since. The Tiamat unleashed all sorts of dragon-like beings, the spawn of Tiamat, and the most recent era of the conflict in the war occurred between minus 2087 DR and minus 1071 DR in Unther. Upon the arrival of Tiamat's cult in Unther, priests of Enlil began to claim that she was the nemesis of the gods, and the god kings claimed that she was responsible for Untherian setbacks. This conflict was concluded with the death of Tiamat at the hands of Marduk, who she also killed during the Battle of the Gods in minus 1071 DR. After the last Rage of Dragons in 1373 DR, the dragon population of Faerun regained their interest in worship in the Draconic Pantheon. This made the followers of Bahamut and Tiamat begin preparations for a possible new battle in the war between the two dragon gods. And that, my friends, brings us to the close of this first video in the Remastered Dragon series. If you'd like me to talk about dragon gods of other world settings, such as Greyhawk, Dark Sun, Eberron, and so on, I'll be mentioning them in many of my future videos, so stay tuned. Please hit the like button if you made it this far, subscribe if you like what I do, check out my Patreon for some exclusive content and all the full scripts of these videos, buy some merchandise, wear your geek with pride, and as always, thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more for you very soon.